I would like to ask you, which are your main concerns about micromobility? We are seeing, especially in the US and in some Latin American countries, that micromobility is gaining popularity very fast. But we also know that there are some risks or challenges associated with this development of micromobility. Could you please elaborate a bit more on that?
Well, yes. So, and just for context, I believe you introduced me, I think nicely, but I couldn't understand everything, so I'll have to trust you with the words. But I write quite a bit about the scooters and e-bikes and new forms of mobility, autonomous vehicles in major magazines and platforms in the U.S. And it's true, I have some thoughts about the rise of scooters and e-bikes, which are almost ubiquitous here in Washington, and I'm sure many of you have them back in your home cities as well. I actually think they're great overall. And one of the reasons why I'm excited, I think they're different, and I should separate them really briefly, I think, the way I think about it. But for one, e-bikes are, how many of you, can I ask you, show of hands, how many of you have tried an electric bicycle, an electric-powered bike? Show of hands. Very few, only a few. I highly recommend you try it because it's really incredible, because you can comfortably go up hills, you can comfortably go twice as far as you can a normal bicycle without getting really hot and sweaty and feeling uncomfortable showing up to work, for example. And I think that the power, in that way, e-bikes have a chance to replace ride-hail and the automobile for shorter trips, meaning from, say, 2 kilometers to 8 kilometers, something like that. An e-bike could be potentially a comfortable substitute if e-bikes are affordable. And the price of e-bikes is falling steadily, and the quality of the batteries is getting better and better, which to me is quite exciting, because I'm someone who, I think like many of you, would like to see fewer trips be taken by automobile, whether by private automobile or frankly by ride-hail, because it contributes to congestion and pollution and road deaths as well. Now, scooters are newer, and I think that they have potential too. They're not as comfortable to go as far as e-bikes, so I don't see them substituting for car trips in the same way. But there is evidence in San Francisco. They're very new, by the way. Scooters have only been around for about 2 years in America, and they're still getting some research around it. But I was really excited about a study that came out looking at San Francisco, where about 1 in 3 trips on a scooter was going to or from public transportation. So it's what we call in America the first mile, last mile opportunity of getting people to and from public transit. It seems like scooters might actually help with that, which to me is exciting. So just really briefly then, in terms of you ask, like, what am I worried about? I worry about just a relative failure in the US to build the kind of infrastructure we need to keep people on scooters and bikes safe. I think it is urgent that we have better bike lanes, protected bike lanes, that will create a whole network. Don't just get you from here to here, but can't get you over there. And without that kind of infrastructure being built, I think that you inevitably end up with conflict between bicyclists and scooter riders and people in cars or pedestrians. And it's not the fault of those on e-bikes or scooters, although they get blamed for it. I think it's the fault of city planners and cities for not yet taking the steps necessary to allow everyone to get where they need to go safely.
You just guessed my next question, which was about integrating these new services with traditional public transportation systems.
Oh.
In the context of large cities, public transit services continue to be the backbone of our mobility systems,
Sure.
let's say, but still having accessible, affordable, and high-quality transit services remain a huge challenge for our cities. And we do have higher travel times, a lot of traffic congestion, and a low satisfaction with the quality of the services. And when we are talking about quality of transportation services, we cannot ignore the gender dimension.
Right.
Even when more than 50% of the users of transportation services are women, most of our services have not been designed or planned according to the needs or to consider the different travel patterns of women. This is a huge challenge for us. How do you see this is being addressed here in the US, or which kind of advice would you give to the participants?
Um, I'll be very candid. I think that the United States has not done a good job in investing in public transportation, and you should not look to us for best practices, to be very blunt. Look to Europe. Look to Japan. We've really messed it up in a number of ways, and you can tell we've messed it up because outside of a very small number of American cities, New York, Washington, Boston, San Francisco, maybe Chicago, the only people who ride public transit, or the vast majority of people who ride public transit, do so because they have no other choice. They're low income. They can't afford a car. And that leads to a whole variety of problems, including underinvestment because the people who are riding transit don't have political power. It leads to bad pollution and emphasis on cars and outside those handful of dense, big American cities. And it leads to bad urban planning also, with cities being more spread out. So we've not done a good job in the U.S. of investing in public transit. And when I look to Latin America, and I've been to Latin America many times, but by no sense, in no way do I claim to be an expert. You should tell me what Latin America should do. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. But I do think that when you say like public transportation is of a low quality, which is what I've heard from many Latin American friends when they refer to their home cities, that's a problem, because what you want to avoid is this sense that once you have enough money, by just reflexively, you buy a car and you drive. Like, that's a huge problem that China has gotten itself into. What you want is to be able to invest in public transportation and make it really genuinely like a quality experience, but also the fastest way to get around, faster than driving. Like, let people be stuck in congestion. Let people be circling to find a parking spot. That's okay, because if you simply don't have enough space in a big city in America or Latin America or China or anywhere, it's just a law of math for everyone to drive. You have to have people using public transit. So if you're having an urbanized population concentrate in a city that's growing rapidly, I do think it's important to get the public transportation system right and make it be one that's desirable for people who have a choice, and they still choose public transportation.
That's a really good point. When you mentioned that we should look to Europe or Japan, we also need to consider how they are funding the public transportation systems and the role of subsidies.
That's right. Almost every system provides a subsidy. Actually, Hong Kong does not. The Hong Kong Transit Agency makes a lot of money. Do you know why? It's really interesting, actually. No. It's because they actually own the property above the transit stations, and they act as real estate developers. So they make a ton of money off of the land. It's Hong Kong. It's a big city. And that allows them to offer really, really high-quality, good service at a very low cost. Through it's the octopus card. So that's actually a model I find really interesting, too. Perhaps I can offer that as something to consider if you're thinking about public transportation finance in your home city, is to consider opportunities to make money outside of simple fare box revenue and government subsidy. The best option I can think of, if you're able to do this legally, is through real estate investment, because, of course, you'll get more riders if you're building tall above a transit stop. There's a huge debate right now in California in the US about how silly it is to have single-family low buildings outside of transit stations. It's bad for urban planning, obviously, because you want as many people as possible taking transit from right there, but also deprives the transit agency of revenue from passengers. So don't do it, America. I'm sorry this is becoming my theme, but America has screwed some things up. I hope you won't.
That's a really interesting thing. Sorry. That's a really interesting point. And now we are witnessing so many technologies that are disrupting the transportation sector. We are all the time hearing about artificial intelligence, machine learning, autonomous vehicles, shared mobility. And maybe shared mobility is one thing that most of our cities in Latin America and worldwide are already experimenting. How do you see that collaboration or integration between shared mobility options and traditional public transportation systems? Some studies conducted, especially in the US, conclude that transportation network companies are increasing congestion, are increasing the number of vehicle miles traveled, and that are also competing with public transportation system. So which kind
Right.
of advice would you give to all the policymakers we have here today?
Again, I feel much more comfortable evaluating and offering commentary on what's happening in America than in Latin America. So I want to be careful. But I will say that in America, let me try and answer it this way. In America, there's a growing body of evidence that, that ride-hail, meaning Uber, for example, is creating additional congestion on American city streets, particularly big cities like New York and San Francisco. And that's actually even slowing down buses, making public transit worse. Because if you ride a bus, you're stuck on that bus going super slowly because of ride-hail vehicles that are traveling around, slowing things down. Because, of course, there's a term called deadheading, where you have an Uber driver who's driving a vehicle waiting for a passenger. That's just wasted miles, right? You're not actually transporting anyone anywhere. So I do think there's a real issue with the impact of ride-hail and more people riding ride-hail on American cities. Now, if I apply that idea to Latin America, I get wary for a couple of reasons. One is I do think like ride-hail, I've taken in Santiago, I took Uber, I did it in Buenos Aires, so I know you can do it, and I suspect, just because of the laws of math, that additional ride-hail vehicles will slow down congestion as well, which, by the way, makes bus rapid transit even more important in dedicated lanes so that people who use public transit have the advantage of going faster. But I also do see forms of shared mobility in places like Mexico City, which is famous for its minibuses, that are potentially quite constructive. Because there you are, unlike my personal Uber trip that I took in Santiago, and when you take a minibus in Mexico City, you are putting many people into one vehicle. And that, to me, sort of blurs the line between public transportation and an individual trip. So that's where I would, again, I'm sure, I think some of you are from Mexico. I'd be interested in your own perspectives on that.
Do we have someone from Mexico City?
I see a
Because
hand up.
in Mexico,
Yeah, what do you think? Yeah,
in Mexico City, I think there's a new application called Yeti,
exactly.
which is
I know the
trying to
founder.
do this match between users and providers. Sí.
Son, I'm sorry. Los trayectos largos, como de 40 kilómetros, que son los que mucha gente utiliza, hace muy eficiente Yeti. O sea, Yeti de verdad está haciendo nuevo servicio de movilidad que está siendo utilizado por ciertos sectores poblacionales, ¿no? Yo justamente, no sé si se puede hacer una pregunta, pero pensar en todas estas aplicaciones que hay en términos de movilidad no sirven para todos los sectores sociales. O sea, cómo la inclusión, cómo incluir a la gente con sectores sociales más vulnerables pensando en América Latina. O sea, yo sé que Estados Unidos es otra cosa, pero pues todas estas aplicaciones van como asociadas a sectores sociales que tienen un servicio de Internet permanente en la ciudad. Y todavía, por lo menos en México, no sé, en el resto de los países de América Latina, no necesariamente todo el mundo tiene esa posibilidad. Entonces, todavía están limitados en ese sentido. Yeti, sin duda, está siendo revolucionario en la Ciudad de México. Y perdón. Está okay.
So she was just explaining that Yeti is working for large distance trips in Mexico City, but we do have this issue of equity when we are talking about this type of platform, because first of all, you need to have a cell phone connected to internet,
Right.
which is not the reality for most of the Latin American citizens. So that was like her main concern. How could we work to...
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Again,
How
sorry
could
I don't
we-
speak Spanish.
How could we work towards improving equity issues when these type of technologies are being developed?
Yeah, and I think in the case of, it's Jetty, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I met the founder, who's a very smart guy who I think left his PhD program at MIT to go launch the company. And I think he is focusing, he told me, on the higher end commuters, those with more means. I think it's a difficult question how you provide these kinds of services out of the gate to new mobility services to those of lower income, because at least from everything I've seen, it's very hard to make money off of those services. It's hard to make money in transportation, period. That's one issue. Uber and Lyft and Bird and Lime, none of them are making money right now. So, and we'll see if they do. There's a lot of people who are skeptical they ever will. So let's be clear about that. But when you start saying, okay, but let's focus in particular on providing services to those of limited means, like for example, with giving people a chance to unlock a scooter not with their phone, but by texting a number and then getting a text code that lets them unlock the scooter, which some companies do, you make even less money off of that. So you're already taking these services that are unproven, not yet profitable, at least in the US, and I don't think they are in Latin America either, and then saying, okay, now let's also serve those with even less means, or so those not even less, those with less means, where every trip will have to be more subsidized through venture capital or something else. It's really tough, and I'm not quite sure, frankly, that that those companies are ready to solve that question yet. They first want to know how to just make money at all.
Just complementing his answer, we do have seen like how these companies are evolving. I mean, here in the US, you need to pay with a credit card. But in some cities in Latin America, you can pay in cash. That is one first step, let's say.
Right.
Then addressing the other part, it's more tricky. We have seen at least in the US, some public transportation systems trying to subsidize this last mile, first mile.
With ride hail, you mean?
Exactly.
It doesn't go well. I do a lot of work with public transportation in the US. I've never seen evidence that ride hail doing this first mile, last mile feeding into public transit works. I haven't seen it yet.
So what would you say about free public transportation?
Have you been reading the articles that I wrote recently? Yeah, I wrote about this one too. So
That's why the question.
there you go. Good research. So there's a growing amount of interest in the idea of free public transit. Just make it all free. Just go ahead. Tallinn, the largest city in actually all of Estonia, provides free public transportation. And just today, I learned that Mannheim in Germany offers free public transportation. In America, the only place I know of that does it is Chapel Hill, North Carolina, my hometown, which is a college town. So the university subsidizes it, and it's a small town, 50,000 people. It's not a big city. So in concept, I think everyone likes the idea of free public transportation because, oh, good, then we can really get more people to use it. But that's not, when you survey people and ask, what do you really want? What would induce you to take public transit? They don't say get away of like the $1 or $2 fare. They say provide more frequent, regular service, improve the service. And so my attitude is actually I'd rather emphasize that than on taking away what are usually relatively modest costs of public transportation. And I'll also say, and this is an uncomfortable reality, but I'm gonna just bring it up, is that when you totally take away the cost of public transportation, you make it free, it becomes, I couldn't hear what that was, but from your face, I bet you know where I'm going with this. But it becomes actually a place where those who are homeless, those without a home, will just board and go from one end of the line to the other. And then we talk about gender. You have an issue of perceived safety and sometimes real safety. And we're seeing that even here in Washington, D.C., where the mayor made the decision to take a certain type of bus we have called the circulator and make it free. And my girlfriend, my partner, said to me afterwards, like, I don't take it anymore because I've had too many uncomfortable experiences with people who are clearly using it as just for the air conditioning or to get off the street for a couple hours. This is very uncomfortable, but it's a reality of something that can happen when you take away the cost of public transportation entirely.
I just want to add one more question related to data.
Sure.
All of these new mobility solutions are generating tons of data.
Yep.
And my question will be, how can cities take advantage of that data, work together with the private sector to access it and try to have a more policy data-driven? Right.
So again, I would love to hear feedback from the group on this, but it's true that ride hail and scooters and these new mobility services generate a ton of data because they have sensors on their vehicles, And then you, if you're using your iPhone or your Google phone or Android, excuse me, you're going to be able to generate lots of information from that as well. And companies like Bird or Uber, they use that data to run their whole operations. But that information can also be used by American cities, or should be used by American cities, to improve mobility policy. Like, do we set up a scooter parking spot here or over there? Depends on where the demand is. We need data to know that. And there's a lot of debate in America about what level of information should be shared between these companies and with cities, because there's also a question of privacy risk. There's a balance there. Now, I have to say that when I look at Latin American cities, at least the places I've probably been to 10 Latin American countries, and I think that kind of, in a big city, in a Buenos Aires, in a Bogota, I could see collecting that kind of information being appropriate, because you have so much demand for vehicles and taxis and scooters on an individual parking spot, and it's a big enough city that you could actually collect the data at scale. In a lot of places, though, honestly, I feel like for a lot of places I've been that are smaller than that, I feel like the best thing, if your goal is to make it easier for people to travel comfortably without driving themselves, which is, to me, a laudable goal, I actually think, to be honest, this may not be what you expect me to say, but I think for mid-sized or smaller cities, I worry less about data and more about creating dedicated, safe, protected spaces for people to ride with a bike, with an electric bike, or a scooter. That, where you don't have to worry about a car hitting you and hurting or killing you. That actually is where I would put the emphasis in, not on having a potentially complicated data policy.